Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our Way Forward Workshop Leader Lunch Break. What an exhausting week it has been. And to help us make sense of what has transpired in the 9 days since many of us cast our votes, we have Dr. David Cohen. Dr. Cohen is interim director of the Ray C. Bliss Institute of Applied Politics and a professor of political science at the University of Akron. He joined the faculty in Akron after earning his PhD at the University of South Carolina, and his goal now is to position the Bliss Institute to compete with the top applied politics schools in the nation. If you're not familiar with the Bliss Institute, you need to be. It was established in 1986, and it has become a nationally recognized bipartisan research and teaching institute. And what they do is they try to increase understanding of the political process with an emphasis on political parties, on grassroots activity, and of course, on ethical behavior. They are a well-recognized source for political commentary and analysis. As for Dr. Cohen, his primary area of research is the American presidency, particularly the White House Office of the Chief of Staff. He also has done research on Congress, campaigns and elections, and Homeland Security. He serves as a member of the White House Transition Project. In between all of these things, he finds time, of course, to teach and to publish. He's the author of, and I love this title, Buckeye Battleground, Ohio Campaigns and Elections in the 21st Century. Of course, he's written many scholarly articles, and he is also a frequent media contributor and guest speaker on national as well as Ohio politics on C-SPAN and elsewhere. He's a member of the board of trustees of the Akron Press Club for you. So you journalists out there have a special bond, and he loves theater and NASCAR. So with that, Dr. Cohen, thank you so much for making time to join us and help us to make sense of all of this.
Well, thank you for that introduction. I don't know how you found all those details. I mean, especially NASCAR and theater and all that. I'm impressed. Y'all have done your homework. And just a slight correction, Buckeye Battleground, I'm merely a co-author and actually a junior co-author. So Dan Coffey from our department is actually the primary author of that book. So I wanted to make sure he got the credit for that. And exhausting day or exhausting week, well, get ready for several exhausting weeks because unfortunately this election, we've just ended the first phase of this election. Normally everything would be pro forma and it would go smoothly. We would know who the president-elect is and we would be getting ready for the inauguration. But it's 2020, so things aren't going to work out quite that way. If you don't mind, I'm going to share my screen. And here we go. And I thought I would start with a really quick timeline for where the election is and where it's headed. So I'm going to scroll down here. We just passed here, if you can see my cursor, we just passed November 3rd, which is Election Day. By the way, this is a great handout from the Congressional Research Service that I'll be sure to share with everybody. It's a very short one, but really handy. So November 3rd, which was last week, November 3rd stretched into the weekend, and we finally had the networks call a winner. That would be Joe Biden, who is president-elect. But the election is really not done then because that is only the end of the first phase. What happens now is we go into the official counting of the votes phase. And the certificates of ascertainment. And so this is where the states are responsible for figuring out what the official count is. And let me see if I'm going to try and make this a little bigger for y'all. Oh, there we go. I figured it out. All right, is that better? Okay, so we're now in this phase right here, and this takes place the day after the election through December 14th. December 14th is when the electors get to cast their votes. As we know, there's 538 total electoral votes. Those are actually individual people that are going to assume those roles. So 538 electors. You need 270 electoral votes to win the election outright because that's a majority of the electoral vote. So this period is the states are now trying to figure out what their official vote count is. They have to be done by December 8th, 6 days before the Electoral College is supposed to meet. This is called the safe harbor deadline. And it's recognized by the courts, and it's a hard deadline. It was a hard deadline in 2000. And when the Supreme Court, and I think Stephen Breyer, the Supreme Court suggested maybe going beyond that and extending it, the rest of the court did not agree. And so it is a very hard deadline. So the states must be done by December 8th, where they figure out the number of votes and who won. And that's 6 days before the Electoral College meets. The Electoral College will meet in the various states on December 14th, and they will cast their votes. I'm sure many of you know the potential problems with the Electoral College, the notion of the faithless elector, the elector that does not vote for the person they're supposed to vote for. If this were a really close election, for instance, if Joe Biden had a 270 to 268 lead going into the Electoral College vote, one person could change the election result. And there's only 14 states in the country that allow you to replace an elector. So what that would mean is absolute and utter chaos if you had a faithless elector changing the electoral result. Now, have there been faithless electors in the past? Yes. In fact, in 2016, there were 7 electors that did not vote for the people they were supposed to have voted for. So Hillary Clinton got 5 less electoral votes and Donald Trump got 2 less electoral votes than they were supposed to have gotten. And we can talk about this because, there's some stuff that can go really sideways in this whole process. After the electors meet, then the electoral votes are certified. They get sent to the vice president and the secretaries of state and the federal judge. This should all be pro forma, should be. January 6th, the new Congress, the 117th Congress will meet, the newly elected one, and they will actually have a session where they actually officially count the electoral votes. This is another place where things could go sideways because you could have members of the House and members of the Senate objecting to the actual electoral votes cast from a state. And if that happens, then there's a lot of things that can happen. They then go into a session where they debate it, they take a vote, and if both houses agree on the objection, then the electoral votes for that state actually get tossed out and they don't get counted. And then January 20th, hopefully we have a presidential inauguration, hopefully. So let's go to the map, if you don't mind, and let's take a look at the presidential map. So this is where we are right now. Up to the minute. This is the decision desk from NBC News. I like this because they're really good about telling you how many votes are left to count in each state. Right now, Joe Biden has been, the networks have recognized that Joe Biden is the president-elect. Right now, he's standing at 279 electoral votes. We are still waiting on 3 states to be called. Now, it'd be Arizona, Georgia, and North Carolina. In North Carolina, Donald Trump has a pretty substantial lead with 70,000, a little bit over 70,000 votes. Most experts are expecting that result not to change, that Trump will eventually win North Carolina. Georgia has yet to be called as well. Joe Biden has about a 14,000 vote lead in Georgia. And in Arizona, Joe Biden has about a 13,000 vote lead there. Even if Biden doesn't carry any of these 3 states, he still is up past the 270 electoral votes needed to win the presidency. And of course, that's because Pennsylvania has put him over the top. And Pennsylvania has 20 electoral votes. Biden has a pretty substantial lead, almost 50,000 votes, which is more than Donald Trump carried Pennsylvania with in 2016. Now, the Trump campaign is suing in a lot of these states. They're suing in Pennsylvania, in Georgia, Arizona, Nevada, which we didn't talk about, which had been called for Biden, and Biden's got about 16,000 vote lead in Nevada. They're suing in Michigan. I believe they're either suing or demanding a recount in Wisconsin. And so, you know, in the Q&A, we'll talk about maybe why this is happening. So that's the presidential level. We should, you know, we have a president-elect. It's very clear based on the margins. These margins are much bigger than the margins in 2016. And Hillary Clinton, she conceded the election the next day. And we have yet to see a concession or any hint of a concession from the current president. On the Senate side, this was quite a surprise, I think, for many observers. There it is. Most had expected, you know, if you follow websites like 538, it looked pretty clear that Democrats were going to take over the Senate by a seat or two. That's clearly hasn't happened. And right now, there are 2 seats that are still up for grabs, and those both happen to be in Georgia because one of the elections, Senate elections in Georgia, was a special election. Georgia's got some funky election laws. And so if you don't get 50% of the vote in the Senate election, it goes to an automatic runoff election. And so there are going to be 2 runoff elections in Georgia, and you can see you can see right there what I brought up. The incumbent Senator Perdue is leading in that race by a little bit over, you know, almost 2 percentage points, but it doesn't matter. He did not get to the 50% threshold. So there's going to be a runoff on January 5th for that seat. The other seat, it was there were multiple candidates in that, and so they split the votes. Nobody came close to the 50%. And so there's going to be hundreds of millions of dollars and many staff flowing into Georgia because control of the U.S. Senate hinges on these 2 Senate seats. If Democrats can flip both of these seats, it'll be a 50-50 tie, and a Vice President, Kamala Harris, would be able to break that tie and therefore give control of the U.S. Senate to Democrats. If they can't, Mitch McConnell remains as majority leader and Republicans maintain control of the U.S. Senate. And then finally, and then I'll turn it over for some questions. If you look at the U.S. House, again, this surprised a lot of experts based on the polling that we saw, based on you know, the projections from 538 and others. Democrats are going to lose several seats in the House of Representatives. And so you need 218 seats for control. Right now, Democrats are projected to have at least 225. You will notice a lot of white congressional districts on this map. Those are districts that are too early to call or too close to call. We don't know the results. New York has a bunch of seats that we're waiting on, and New York did a pretty poor job during the primary of figuring out who won those primary elections. So I think it's going to be a while till we figure out. You might recall in 2018, it took several weeks to figure out the final numbers, and especially in California, it took a while to figure out some of those numbers. So it's going to be a while. Democrats very disappointed. They thought they would extend their lead in the House. Instead, their margin has definitely shrunk. So with that, I will turn it over. Wow, it's 12:15. Look at that. I'll turn it over for Q&A. Just a question, Bob, do you prefer that I stop sharing my screen, or would it be helpful to have my screen up still?
Why don't you go ahead and stop share? And then, like I
Okay.
said, we can share those links. That'll get a fuller view in terms of participation. So thank you so much for going over everything and condensing just an incredible amount of information in a short period. And we have had several questions come in. So the first one, and I think you alluded to maybe, talking about this topic, but, as you went over the House and the Senate, results, clearly there was a lot of down ballot Republican gains that surprised a lot of people. And then you have this situation where President Trump has lawsuits in his election team across several states. And there's this interesting juxtaposition in terms of the overall success of the Republican ticket versus what the Trump campaign is alleging happened. And how does that play out? Do you see any of these lawsuits really progressing and gumming up kind of the process that you laid out in the beginning, or is there any precedent in terms of what this has looked like in the past?
Well, I mean, I think clearly there was a lot of split ticket voting this time. A lot of people that were disaffected with President Trump's leadership and the way he carried himself in office, but were Republicans and then voted more down ticket for their senators or for their congressional members. As far as the legal arguments, so far, none of the legal arguments have withstood any kind of scrutiny. I believe so far, the Trump campaign and the Republicans that have jumped onto these lawsuits, I believe they're 0 for 10 so far. And let me just make a blanket statement about voter fraud. President Trump has been talking about voter fraud ever since the 2016 election, when he said that he actually won the popular vote, even though he had lost it by 3 million votes. He said it was because of voter fraud in California. A lot of illegals were voting, and he actually won the popular vote. He's been talking about voter fraud for 4 years. And that rhetoric has really ratcheted up in 2020. And it's very problematic because his rhetoric is really undercutting the confidence that especially his supporters have in the election system. Remember this summer, he started talking about problems with the post office, even though his postmaster general that he purposely put in processes to slow down the mail. And so the problems that we see with the post office were actually caused by his appointee purposely, putting in some processes that hurt the process. There have been numerous academic studies on voter fraud in the country, in the history of voter fraud. There are just a handful, a couple of hundred cases over the last several decades. And we're talking about billions of votes being cast. Even the Heritage Foundation, which is a very right-wing organization, the Heritage Foundation has did a study, and they could only show a little over 1,000 cases of voter fraud over the last, over a decade. And so mass voter fraud doesn't exist in this country. It's a lie. And anybody that says that it does is clearly lying for a political purpose. It just doesn't exist. Voter suppression exists, and that is something that we can point to as a problem with our voting system. But voter fraud doesn't exist. The problem is, again, with the president saying that there's voter fraud with the lots of lawsuits. If ultimately Joe Biden is sworn in on January 20th. And becomes president, the problem is his most enthusiastic supporters have now been primed to not accept the legitimacy of the presidential election, and that's a real problem for our democracy going forward. We've never seen this. We've never seen a president, refuse to concede under these conditions. The election wasn't particularly close. Especially based on the margins in these several states. And also Joe Biden, his number is now up over 5 million votes in the popular vote that he's winning by. And that number is expected to go up pretty dramatically once they get done counting the votes in places like New York and California. So that's my very long-winded answer to that question. I don't know if I actually answered the question. I hope I did.
No, yeah, thank you so much. So similar to 2016, and I think you most clearly illustrated this in the House results for 2020, and that did not track with polling and was surprising to people. This is the second cycle, presidential cycle, where polling has been just pretty obviously incorrect. Is that accurate? Actually, that polling is a guess and kind of a taking the temperature. But is this a trend? Are there issues that pollsters have determined are kind of causing these unexpected results?
Well, this is the major challenge for the polling industry. And, I'm not a pollster. I rely on polls, like other academics. And, Nate Silver's not a pollster. We all go to his those that are interested in campaigns, elections, go to his 538 website every day and check it obsessively. He's not a pollster either. He is basing his models based on the polling. There's a real problem because twice we've been burned, not necessarily with the national popular vote. I think the polls are going to be pretty similar and they're pretty on target. But the problem is we have an electoral college system. And so our state polling, for some reason, has been off. Now, the polls did predict the presidential winner, but the margins were clearly off. I think, many people were expecting states like Florida and Texas to be more competitive. They clearly weren't. So there's a problem with that state level polling. There's real challenges because, when we would poll people 30, 40 years ago, everybody had a landline. You didn't have cell phones, right? You didn't have the internet and you didn't have caller ID. You had to, and now those things are part of the process. And so it's a real challenge. I don't know how they're going to fix the system because, 2016 was, that was one time. For me personally, I gave them the benefit of the doubt, talked about how they've made corrections, and then we're back in the same space in 2020. So I'm not a pollster, but there's going to be a lot of money, a lot of time, a lot of effort spent on trying to figure out, where they went wrong again. Is it shy Trump voters? Is it people purposely messing with pollsters when they get polled? Is it you're just not getting that true random sample that you need in order to make a guess about the population as a whole? I don't know. I don't know what the answers are.
In your at the front end of your comments, when you were going through the timeline, you had made the statement that hopefully there is an inauguration on January 20th. Has there been an instance in U.S. history where the inauguration hasn't happened on the prescribed date? And just with the lot of the voice happening, just kind of supporting President Trump's claims about the election. I'm trying to frame this as apolitically as possible, but why is the GOP leadership refusing to acknowledge Vice President Biden as the president-elect? And is there something that would happen that kind of would change the national conversation about the election?
Yeah, so very quickly, 1876, we almost got to that. I think it was the day before. They had figured out it was going to be Rutherford v. Hayes. So that was real close. If we don't have a president chosen, what happens is we then have an acting president. And if they haven't decided on a vice president, that acting president actually becomes the Speaker of the House, except the Speaker of the House actually has to resign their seat in Congress. And so they become acting president until a winner is chosen. I'm just really disturbed by the fact that high-level Republicans have not observed and congratulated and acknowledged that Joe Biden is the president-elect. There's a lot of lawsuits in these various states. There's a lot of stuff that could really go sideways. And what I mean by that is there's going to be a lot of pressure put on these Republican state legislatures, because all of these states have Republican state legislatures. They're the ones that actually get to determine who the presidential electors are. They're supposed to do it based on the election results. But let's say, what if the courts say, there's evidence of voter fraud, and then the state legislature uses that as an excuse to throw out the elections for an entire state and then decide to assign the electors themselves. That's a possibility. Even though that would violate state law potentially, if it's sanctioned by the courts, who's to stop that? And then you have, you'll have potentially a dispute between the governor and the Secretary of State and the state legislature. What if in a couple, maybe 3 states, what if this process actually happens? Ones where the entire process is controlled by Republicans, like at Georgia. At 16 electoral votes right there. I mean, I don't want to freak people out, but we're in a very dangerous time right here. I am very worried about civil unrest happening, until the inauguration and even afterwards. I'm very concerned about that. I'm very concerned about the fact that we saw a Secretary of State yesterday of the United States saying that there'll be a smooth transition to power to a second Trump term, knowing that there's a president-elect Biden that had, that everybody that the networks have acknowledged, and that clearly, if you look at the data, clearly won the election. I'm concerned. I'm concerned about what's happening with the Department of Defense and the fact that the Secretary of Defense was fired. A number of other civilian members of the leadership were fired, and they were replaced by loyalists to the president. Why does that happen? Why would that happen? And what are the implications of that? Does that mean that, if there is protesting in the streets, that the Insurrection Act could be activated, and this time you don't have a Secretary of Defense that'll push back on that, like Secretary Esper did this summer when the president was wanting to use the Insurrection Act? There's all sorts of things that are happening that are not normal, and it's very abnormal to have lots of firings and purges in the lame duck session when a president's lost an election. That just doesn't happen. And also there's foreign policy implications of that. And a lot of people haven't noticed that, China has removed, pro Hong Kong legislators in Hong Kong, while we haven't been paying attention. What could happen? Does Russia then decide to move into the Baltic region? There are all sorts of things that can happen in this 10-week period that I'm just not sure the country has ever seen before or is ready for.
So I'm going to ask you the impossible in about 90 seconds or 2 minutes. I think one of the logical questions here is the Electoral College versus basing a presidential election upon the popular vote.
Right.
And what's the process by which that would change? How does that happen? Is it state by state level? Is that where how's that legislation work?
Good question. And let me just say for the record, I think the Electoral College is it's way past its prime. It's unnecessary. We don't need it anymore. It's an artifact of the 18th century and it needs to go away. We've had 2 presidents in the last 20 years be elected, even though they did not receive the most votes. And that's because the Electoral College and the quirks of the Electoral College. First way is a constitutional amendment. And that is nearly impossible to do. We've only had 27 amendments to the Constitution. It would take a 2/3 vote in the Congress and then a 3/4 vote in the states. I mean, that's almost an impossible thing at this point. Second possibility is the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact, and NPV is an organization that's been pushing states to change their state laws and to join an interstate compact so that their electoral votes would be tied to the popular vote. And that legislation would only go into effect if enough states had joined to put that electoral vote count over 270. That's probably the most likely way that the Electoral College gets changed. I believe Colorado just joined it after this election. And we're a few states away from it actually having enough electoral votes to be effective. The problem is all the states that have joined are democratically leaning states. And so we've got, like everything else, we've got a party split. Democrats don't like the Electoral College, or Republicans like the Electoral College. And so I think for right now, we're stuck.
Well, thank you. I love discussing politics and could sit here for probably another 2 hours and toss questions your way and listen to your response and really appreciate your expertise and perspective on everything. I'm going to turn things back over to Marianne Crossley, who can close us out.
Thanks so much, Bob. Dr. Cohen, thank you.
Thank
That
you.
was a very healthy dose of reality for all of us. I don't know if it will contribute to sleepful nights, but it's good to be aware of what lies ahead.
Well,
So
I
thank you
have
for
been
your
sleeping very well, and
I'm
that's after
sorry?
the election. I said I've not been sleeping well, so maybe I'm just paranoid. So,
Great. Well, thank you for all the great information that you shared. We appreciate your time.